I'm Cristopher Marchini, and this is a small presentation of my final papers. Its title is Errori di traduzione e di imperizia dell'interprete, and it is about mistranslations. And I'd like to start with a mistranslation regarding World War II. The bombing of Monte Cassino is considered the most violent bomb attack against a non-military building during World War II. The Allied forces launched their attack on February the 15th, 1944. They were sure that a German battalion was using it as a command post. This building, built in 529, and still the most glorious monastery in the Western world, is where Benedict of Nursia wrote his famous Rule of Saint Benedict, containing precepts for his monks. The monastery had survived Lombard, Saracen, and Norman attacks, as well as an earthquake in 1349. During World War II, not only did this building become a refuge for the Benedict monks, but also for the several hundreds of refugees who, unfortunately, were killed during the bombing. However, very few people know that this tragedy was due to a misinterpretation. A brief historic introduction. From 1943 to 1945, Cassino was a strategic point for German battalions, trying both to hide and to stop the Allied forces' advance towards Rome. Roosevelt, in an attempt to justify this bombing, affirmed that the monastery had become a very important emplacement for the German army to bomb the Allied forces' armies. A German stronghold with artillery and everything necessary to stop the enemy. Furthermore, the Allied forces intercepted the following message: Ist habt noch im Kloster? Ist Abbot still in the monastery? Ja, im Kloster mit Mönchen. Yes, in the monastery with monks. Unfortunately, the word Abbot, was misunderstood as the abbreviation of Abteilung, German translation for battalion. Furthermore, if the interpretation of this word had been true, this would have meant that the German army had violated the agreement with the Vatican, according to which all religious buildings were to be considered neutral areas. Colonel Hunt, one of the people involved in this episode, as well as diplomat and Winston Churchill's personal secretary, affirmed he realized that what was happening was due to a misinterpretation only when the bombing had already started. By a strange twist of fate, after this episode, the ruins of the monastery became a stronghold for the German battalions, and it took the Allied troops another 3 months to drive the Germans from their position. At a later stage, Gregorio VII, abbot of the monastery during the war who survived the bombing, declared that there were no Axis forces in the building before the bombing. Fortunately, he managed to save the archive and every ancient book conserved in the monastery from the bombing. We can only wonder whether, in a less stressful moment, the word abt would have been interpreted correctly or not. Unfortunately, the 250 victims of the bombing and the 4,000 victims of the ensuing battles paid this misinterpretation with their lives. Now I'm going to talk about a misinterpretation regarding the US President Jimmy Carter. During his visit to the Polish Prime Minister in December 1977, Carter delivered a speech at the Warsaw airport before 500 Polish personalities. This speech went down in history, at least in the USA, not for the predictable and unoriginal things said by Carter, but for the way they were translated by the interpreter, a certain Stephen Seymour. Seymour spoke a very poor Polish and used many Russian words, so after only few minutes he had given the United States Department a valid reason to fire him, which they did. What were the mistakes in question? I'm going to expose just few of these mistranslated sentences. The sentence "I left the United States this morning" was translated as "I abandoned the United States this morning." Then the sentence "I wish to learn your opinions and understand your desires for the future" came out as "I'd like to know your lusts for the future." Another mistranslated sentence was "Poland is the ancestral home of more than 6 million Americans," and it was translated as "a state also which constitutes the fatherland of more than 10 million Americans." So this was a very bad situation for Jimmy Carter. Furthermore, the words used by Seymour were very archaic and his grammar was pretty shaky. As if this were not enough, the interpreter called forthwith after Seymour's debacle had the opposite problem. He could not understand what Carter said. Another prompt substitution with the Polish Prime Minister's interpreter took place, and finally Carter had a good interpreter, but it was too late. By then Carter had become a laughingstock and the subject of many jokes. Some say that this anonymous way of being president stemmed from the poor figure he cut in Poland. Obviously, these people are talking nonsense, but if only Carter had had a good interpreter, things would have gone better.